Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Andrew Saunders. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer of the Globe and Mail. And once again, we're very pleased to participate in this year's most influential brand event. Today's event wouldn't be possible without the likes of Ipsos and Publicis and the ACA and the CNBC. So I do have to have a quick special shout out to clearly Steve and Brett and Ron and Shannon for your continued leadership and support in the program. We were actually hoping today to have a hybrid event this year where many of us could come back and return to the event space within the Globe Mail Center. But unfortunately, that's not the case. And we've had to adapt and organize and pull together a 2.5 hour, I believe, very thoughtful virtual content lineup, which I hope you're going to find insightful and rewarding for your time today, because I know you're very, very busy. Before we jump into the agenda, I will need to go over a few housekeeping items. There will be two opportunities during the event for a Q&A period. And on your welcome page at the bottom left of your screen, you'll see a box that says Ask the Expert or Ask the Question. Simply type in your question and hit the blue Submit button. And we'll definitely try our best to respond to all your questions. If you're having any technical difficulty, which I hope you're not, please email the address at the bottom of your screen and we'll resolve those as fast and soon as we can. Just as a reminder, we will be sending out a post-event email in the coming days after today. And within that, we'll be covering up a few things. One is some key takeaways from the various speakers, the full recording of the event, and a survey so you can provide us some guidance on how we can improve the format moving forward. This year marks the 11th year of the study, and it's another, leads to another, list of exciting programming lineup. And we are very fortunate to have Steve Levy, the infamous Steve Levy from Ipsos, share the results and provide us a window, I think, into what makes these brands unique and influential in his own way, which I think is unique in itself. We all know brands have meaning. And some have personalities, really. And some, though, have really been able to develop authentic connections with their clients or their customers, which gives those organizations a real competitive advantage over others, regardless of economic, health, or external political forces. I think these brands are important. They're persuasive. They're prominent and purposeful in the lives of their customers. And to me today, we hear these unique stories, I think, which I love to hear, which gives us a glimpse into the better understanding what makes them tick and what makes them so influential. Last year, I referenced the challenges of 2020 as we were entering the second phase of the pandemic. But I must admit, looking back over the past year, what amazes me is the resilience, the agility, and the amount of innovation that takes place across our entire industry as we've all adapted our organizations to this new virtual world. And we all know how important that is as consumer behavior continues to shift towards digital consumption, and trust is now ever that much more important on those digital platforms. And you compound that with, I think, the expectations of customers, of how they look at organizations and expect them to be real, authentic agents of change that can help shape and inform both culture and society in a positive way. And hence, we at the Globe and Mail believe that courageous, empathetic, independent journalism does make a positive impact on society and does improve the lives of Canadians. And I hope over the past year, you're able to enjoy some of our coverage as related to either the long-lasting coverage around the pandemic, the heavier emphasis we did on the Brampton L6P postal code project, which was incredibly hard hit by the pandemic, the Canada-China relations and the release of the two Michaels, or the geopolitical turmoil and the defeat of the West, one could say, in Afghanistan and the knock-on consequences, or our endless personal finance coverage, which I think helped guide some financial decisions of Canadians on how to navigate through the likes of rising cost of living, the housing affordability issue, or the growth of inflation in itself, which is going to have a knock-on effect. Or to say we at the Globe will continue to push hard, set high standards, and deliver on improving on the lives of Canadians. Now back to the agenda. Up next, you're going to hear from Steve, but right after Steve will be followed from Michael McCain, who's the president and chief executive officer of Maple Leaf Foods, who will be our keynote speaker today, which we're very fortunate to have. And following his presentation, we'll have our first Q&A. And after Michael's session, Andrew Bruce will step up and be on the panel and facilitate a panel of senior leaders. They'll be focusing on marketing strategies in the post-pandemic future. And we'll hear from Tammy Sadinsky, who's the Senior Vice President, Brand and Marketing for CIBC, Catherine Hay, President and CEO of the Kids Help Phone, and Candy Lee, who's the Chief Marketing Officer of HelloFresh. And then we'll follow a quick panel after that. So without further ado, I must pass it along to my great friend. I try to get my glasses to look like his, but I can never keep up with him. Mr. Steve, who is the Chief Client Officer of Ipsos. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for that unique introduction. And thank you all for joining us today. It is truly a pleasure to be here today again. I must be honest, I would rather be with you at the Globe in that fantastic facility with 350 marketers, agency folks, media folks, and all of the benefits that gathering would accrue. We are here in a virtual environment, and it is a little unique. There is something to be said from doing this from one's own office at home. And there is something to be said for the fact that, we do have a capacity issue when we do this at a forum like the Globe. Some 350, I think, is the capacity. Of course, online, 1,100 of you have registered for this event. And so it is a little bit different. All brands, influential or not, live within a context within which they have to operate. And I'd like to start with a short video that really expresses that difference. But I would encourage you throughout this presentation to offer conversation, offer comment using the hashtag that you see on this screen. So a little bit of context. Again, my colleagues in public affairs always reinforce, quite rightly so, the importance of context. And that's why they have a series of studies that are focused entirely on the context within Canada. So take a look at this.
Inflation was this hot was back in February 2003 when Avril Lavigne topped the chart.
Our community center is getting overflowed with
isn't over yet.
So look, some really powerful images there from 2021, images that will likely be burned in many of our memories for some time to come. And as Anthony Fauci said in that last clip, it isn't over yet. It isn't over yet. There are 6 high-level findings that I'd like to make comment on right off the bat. The first is that new technology and media brands are still dominant from an influence perspective. The second is that products, solutions, services, and advertising that intersect in relevant ways with consumers in moments that matter. These are the brands, the ones that connect with us at the right time are most likely to have influence. They're the ones that are most likely to have influence. Third is that brand influence does differ by generation. And I am going to come back to that and spend a little bit of time talking about how that is the case. 4 is that it's very difficult for local brands to obtain and retain a top 10 ranking, if for no other reason that they simply don't have the scale, the scope, the access to capital, and indeed the access to talent in many cases that global brands do. And so when we do see a local brand in the top 10, either in this country or in another country, it really is rather special. 5 is the fact that, of course, innovation matters. There's no question that it matters. But innovation that's anchored in assistance and helpfulness that helps Canadians get through the things that they've had to get through, certainly in the last 24 months. That's the innovation that really counts. And 6 is the fact that trust, yes, trust is important and has always been. But more than being trusted, brands that are seen to be earning the public's trust, that is a differentiator. Certainly was in 2021. So yes, I am going to talk about influence a little bit and what comprises influence, to give you a little bit of background. We are going to talk about the generations. We will talk this year about the impact of influencers. I won't define what that is now, but I am going to talk about it a little bit. It's a new segment, as is the segment that we now have on activism and, of course, supporting a cause. I'm going to introduce you to 4 brands that were not in our top 10, but were significant gainers throughout the course of 2021. And then I will introduce you not to all of the 10 most influential brands, because we don't have time to do that today, but certainly to a few of them, and then we'll wrap up. So as Andrew mentioned, 11 years we've been into this. This year we surveyed 6,700 Canadians. We covered 137 brands. We report on 100 of them, but 137 was actually the number that we looked at across 18 different categories. I interviewed leaders and CMOs of 10 organizations this year that are leading or gaining from a brand influence perspective. And of course, this is against the context of some $15 billion having been spent in Canada on advertising. So this simple to remember 18-digit number with two outliers is what you need to remember from a process and protocol perspective. I did do interviews with a number of leaders, and those interviews are currently being edited and will be available for all of you when we've uploaded them to YouTube as a resource for Canada's marketing community. So which 137 brands and why those ones? Well, there are really 2 criteria that we use. The first criteria is ad expenditure. And we're fortunate enough that Andrea Beach and her team at Numerator provide us with the ranking of all of the brands in Canada by ad spend and indeed what media has been used. So the primary criteria that we use is ad expenditure. But the second criteria is judgment, because we're very clear about the fact that some brands don't have big ad budgets, but we know intuitively that they are influential. I'd also like to give a shout out to Brian Siegel and the folks at ComScore, who also contributed some data to help us understand some of the results. So again, Andrea, Brian, and your respective teams, thank you very much. So influence does matter. There's no question that influence matters. We thought over the years how best we might express why this is the case and how this is the case succinctly, but we always come back to the same conclusion and the same way in which we'd like to express that. And that's with this very simple chart. The horizontal axis on this chart reflects time. The vertical axis reflects growth and value as expressed by stock price. And this line here reflects the year-over-year cumulative change in stock price from 2011 to 2021. And it's the average of the Dow and the NASDAQ. And for those of you who've been in the market, it's been a bull market over the last decade. Of course, we've seen dips in 2018, early 2019, and then again, of course, in March of 2020. But by and large, it's been a really bull market. But overlay the 10 most influential brands in any one of those given years, and it's very clear that influential brands are worth more, much more, and consistently so. And let's also be clear that the value expressed in these lines is an output variable. It's a consequence of something that you and your colleagues in the marketing community are doing. One of those things, of course, is being influential. And so influence is an input variable. Value, as expressed in this chart, is an output variable. We're concerned, of course, with things that you can do. And so the nature of influence is multidimensional. It is multidimensional. It's not one issue or one variable. In fact, there are 11 ingredients, if you like, that go into comprising the metric that we call influence. And they are by design different. They are by design different because we don't want to stack the deck to ensure that a bank or a car company or a social media company is clearly the most influential. So having issues like changing the way you shop or being fundamental to your life or making life more interesting or being a brand that you can identify with, being relevant, and indeed in some cases changing your lexicon, your everyday language. They're different, 11 different ingredients. And so, yes, we use these ingredients, we do create one metric, and then we index the metric. And so a brand that has an index of 420 is 4 times more influential than the average brand in our set. A brand that has an index of 12 is 1/10 roughly as influential as the average brand in that set. Not complicated, not complicated. Okay, so let's put influence to the side for a moment. What you need as marketers is levers. You need levers that you can push up and down to increase that influence. There are 6 such levers that we found to be in existence. Across the 100 brands, 137 brands, I should say, that we measure, engagement accounts for 26% of all influence. Trust is at 23%, and being leading edge is at 23%. Corporate citizenship at 15%, presence at 9%, and the dimension that we included in 2020 and have retained in 2021 is COVID. These are the 6 dimensions, the 6 levers, if you like, that you as marketers can pull up and down to increase your influence. Now, has this changed over time? Well, if we go back and we look at 2016, here's what the world looked like in terms of what contributed to the influence of the 100 brands that we looked at in 2016. Of course, there was no COVID. If we overlay 2020, there was a COVID dimension. And so what moved down? Well, the leading edge dimension moved down a little. Trustworthiness moved down a little. Presence actually moved up. Corporate citizenship was down and engagement was down. And when we overlay the current year, it hasn't really changed very much. So things do change a little, but not an awful lot. And to be perfectly clear, no brand has 6 dimensions that contributes to its influence. By and large, brands have 2 or maybe 3 dimensions that contribute to their influence. These brands, you're aware of them probably, advertising expenditure, but I got to tell you, not influential brands. So let me talk for a little bit first about the generations. For the past decade or so, we've had 6 living generations in this country, probably a testament to the healthcare system and, of course, the fact that we're all living that much longer. So I'm going to give you a quick whistle-stop tour of the 4 generations that most marketers spend most of their time on. The first of which is Generation Z. Now, we don't study all of Gen Z because ethically we can't survey people under 15. So the Gen Z portion that we're looking at is 15 to 24. Now, that group now represent 11% of the population. That's about 4 million Gen Zers. Now, at 11% of the population, they have 5% of the net worth in this country. They're the post-9/11 generation. They are digital natives. They're realistic, assertive, cautious. They're pretty thoughtful. They're independent, and they are by far, the most climate-concerned generation. Then we have the millennials. Millennials are now aged between 25 and 40. I'm somewhat of an expert. I have 2 kids who are millennials, so I have first-hand knowledge of this generation. They represent 18% of the population. There's 7 million millennials now in this country. 18% of the population, 12% of the net worth. I'm going to pause. I'm going to repeat that. 18% of the population, 12% of the net worth. So think about all of the attention this generation gets when 12% of the net worth is associated with them. They're still in the kind of figuring it out process. They're the FOMO generation. They're the generation that has many options. They're the most educated, the most resourceful, the most connected. They're a little overwhelmed, and they love instant gratification. Gen X, now aged 41 to 56, 22% of the population. There's over 8 million Gen Xers now, 22% of the population, but 26% of the net worth in this country. This is the generation that's really looking for reliability. They want convenience and value. They're media hybrids. They're independent, adaptable, self-reliant. They're a little bit skeptical, but they are the busy generation. No doubt about it. This is the generation that is incredibly busy. Then there's my generation, the boomers. We're now aged 57 to 75. Just to be clear, I'm closer to the 57 end of that spectrum. They represent 24% of the population. They're still the largest generation. 9 million boomers in Canada, 49% of the net worth. I'm going to pause again. 24% of the population, 49% of the net worth. There hasn't been a movement of wealth across the generations yet. And so I would urge marketers to consider the fact that the boomers are not dead yet. They're not dead yet. Some have retired. They are the heaviest consumers of traditional media. They're still the me generation. They're optimistic. They're self-serving. That's the whistle-stop tour of the generations. Fact of the matter is that the generations rank brands differently. They do. Here's an old brand, General Motors, car company. Not an influential brand in this country. But the rankings of the older generations versus the young generations are very different. Very different. Here's another car company. Here's Tesla. Not an influential brand, but we see the reverse scenario, where the older generations rank this brand considerably lower than the younger generations. A little bit of change, certainly, in the past year. A little bit of change, absolutely. But by and large, we see that the younger generations have a higher ranking for Tesla than the older generations. Here's Home Depot. The Gen Z guys are not in the home market. And sad as it may be to say, they're likely not going to be for a long time, given the current circumstance. The boomers and Gen X, they are in their homes and they're renovating. And Home Depot, that's an influential brand for them, relatively speaking. And even more so in 2021 than we saw in 2020. Here's Canadian Tire, still a fairly influential brand for the boomers and Gen X, less so for the millennials and Gen Z, although interestingly enough, we did see a somewhat of a change in the past year or so. Here's TikTok. TikTok has no influence for my generation. For Gen Z, it's one of the top 10 most influential brands. It doesn't have generational harmony, one of the things that any brand needs to have if it wants to be influential overall. It doesn't have generational harmony, not yet anyway. But things are changing, certainly in the middle years. Things are changing a little. Nintendo, another brand that has a generational divide, likely a function of the gaming world, but again, much more influential amongst the younger cohorts. A little bit of change, but not a lot during the course of the year. And Uber Eats, a brand where we thought we would have seen more generational harmony, didn't happen in the last year or so. Perhaps next year, but not yet. Not yet. Fact of the matter is that our values are formed early in life. And so it's incredibly important that marketers understand those values and market to them. I'm going to talk now a little bit about the impact of influencers. This is a new segment in the study. It's a new segment in the study. Now, in an effort for us to understand the impact of influencer marketing, we established that 23% of Canadians regularly, and that's a key word, regularly follow any social media influencers. Now, of course, that varies dramatically by generation, as you can see on this slide. It's very different, but it also varies quite dramatically by gender. You can see here 29% females, 16% of males. But what you need to know, really, is that those that do regularly follow influencers rank some brands very differently. Now, here's TikTok, Uber Eats, and Adidas. All rank much higher amongst those that regularly follow influencers. But, and this is the key here, it's not just those brands. There are many other brands where this is the case. At this point, I don't think we can draw a cause and effect relationship and make the claim that these brands are all using influencers in a way that's positively impacting that brand's influence. But we have more than a suspicion that there is something at play here. There is something at play here. And, you know, fact of the matter is that many influencers, one other point I quickly want to make, I want to diverge for a moment and tell you that when we looked at the digital marketing study that we released in October, this is a survey of marketers and agencies, it was very clear that over the course of 10 years, the marketing community in Canada is using influencer marketing much more frequently than it was in the past. All that to say that many brands have been using influencers that have tremendous reach. It's no wonder that they're being associated with these brands. The likes of Sarah Nicole Landry and Dante Colley, these are influencers that are generating millions of followers. The other new aspect that we added to the study this year was about activism. Now, activism is a word used in recent times with much more frequency, perhaps because there are simply more causes in play, certainly more than in my early life. And the world of branding has been engaging with causes in many different ways. As a consequence, we wanted to try and understand the intersect between brands, causes, and influence. So to do this, we first wanted to establish the degree, if you like, to which Canadians are involved. And so we simply asked Canadians, when it comes to supporting a cause or an issue that you feel is important to you, how would you describe your level of involvement over the past 12 months? And the way it falls out is that there are really three segments. 34% of us are what we might think of as activists. Those are people who are engaged in lobbying, organized activities, they take part in protests, marches, rallies, they join groups, they engage in conversation. 14% of us are what we have coined slacktivists. They share, they tweet, they change their social media profiles to show support, they donate money. And the balance, pacifists. By and large, that segment of the population not doing too much at all. And of course, again, we see tremendous differences by demographics. So as you might imagine, and we were not too surprised by this, the pacifists very much skew older. The slacktivists are pretty much the same across the generations, and the activists very much skew younger. So not terribly surprised by that finding. Perhaps a little more surprised by the finding that it also skews by gender. So again, the key here is, do activists rank brands differently in terms of influence? And as it turns out, activists most certainly see some brands as being more influential than their less active counterparts. You can see here huge differences for Airbnb, TikTok, and Skip. And of course, you might think, well, that's kind of obvious because they skew younger. But take a look at all of these other brands, some of which are fairly traditional. A President's Choice and a PC Optimum, they don't necessarily skew younger, but we clearly see a difference here. And we need to think about the implications of what that means as we move forward. Certainly food for thought under the growing umbrella of cause marketing. There are 4 gainers this year that I'm going to touch on. These are brands that are not top 10 brands. They're not top 10 brands, but they gained tremendously in rank during the course of the year. The first of those brands that I'm going to touch on is TikTok. Now, TikTok, as many of you know, is a video sharing app that was developed in Canada. It's an app that allows us, or certainly users, to upload short videos and to share them with their followers. 11 million Canadian users in 2021. Now, that's up from 3 million just a couple of years back. That's tremendous growth. It's also the case that the average Canadian user spends 6 hours a month on TikTok. Thank you again to Comscore for providing that. Even Jagmeet Singh, big user of TikTok during the last election to connect with the younger voters, effectively so as well. Here's how the trend line looks for TikTok over the last 3 years. So again, you can see why we're positioning this as a gainer, because only since 2020, it's jumped up over 30 spots in the rankings. From a generational perspective, here's a brand that does not have generational harmony, moved up for 3 of the generations, flat for the boomer generation. Don't know what's going to happen next year, but clearly a brand that's on the move. And if you think about what sits behind that brand's influence, and I'd like to remind you that on the bottom of this slide is the generic influence across the 137 brands, the numbers I showed you earlier, and on the top, here's the influence profile, if you like, for TikTok. So what contributes to this brand's influence is its being leading edge and its engagement, which of course is its very reason for being. The second big gainer in 2021 was Skip the Dishes. Skip, as many of you know, spent a lot of time with John Hamm, generating awareness in its first couple of years, and its messages have really transformed from one that was focused on entitlement, the idea that you really should be receiving great delivery, to one of empowerment, which is much more about choice than about entitlement. So Skip, as many of you know, or actually probably don't know, is sitting in a category that has tripled in the last 3 years, tripled as a channel. So it's kind of riding a wave with a number of other players. 3.5 million Canadian users in 2021. It's the official food delivery app for the NHL and the Canadian Olympic Committee, recognizing the fact that when we're at home, that's clearly an opportunity for an organization like Skip. Skip last year launched Express Lane. So this is a service that they're now offering that goes way beyond food delivery. We're going to see lots of other different categories that Skip is involved in, with the idea that it's probably going to add close to 1,000 jobs to the economy in Canada. Skip's influence over the last 3 years, again, moved up 10 spots in the course of 19 to 20. And as you can see here, a big jump from 20 to 21. Again, if you take a look at the generational differences, this is a brand that's being used by the busy generation, by Gen X. These are the guys who are really focusing on Skip. And its influence profile is driven mostly by its leading edge nature and its engagement, where it way over indexes. The next brand, interestingly enough, that moved up a lot in 2021 is Loblaws, a traditional brand. Loblaws actually last year brought back, after a 10-year absence, the Insiders Report. They brought it back. It was digital for many years. This year, they brought back the printed copy with an enormous campaign that covered multimedia and indeed was successful in the process. Strong response to COVID-19. The public really saw that Loblaws kind of stepped up to the plate during 2020 and 21. Retail sales continue to grow in 2021, as we saw in 2020, and over 10.5 million Canadians were viewing what they do online. That's up from 9 million the year before. 65% increase in share price during the course of 2021. Given what we've seen in terms of performance, that's tremendous, obviously. And their ranking moved up in the course of 20 to 21, as you can see here, 15 spots. Again, another gainer during the course of the year. From a generational perspective, this indeed is a brand that has generational harmony. It moved up across all 4 of the generations that we've been looking at. And their profile is absolutely the primary contributor to the Loblaw's influence factor is indeed trust. But it was also one of the very few brands where we saw an over-index in COVID. And given all of the things that they did and were seen to be doing during the last 2 years, clearly it's paying off for them. And the last brand that I'm going to touch on from a gainer's perspective is Home Depot. I made mention of it earlier. I'm going to make mention of it again here. 182 stores across Canada. On average, each store 100,000 square feet. These are big box stores. They have 28,000 employees, ambassadors for the brand in some respects. The Home Depot Foundation, again, from a corporate citizenship, seen as adding to what they're doing, and a strong response to the pandemic in more ways than I can mention here today. And as you can see, the trend line here in the last 2 years, very different by generation, very different. As I said earlier, Gen Z, not in the housing market, not likely to be in the housing market. But for the boomers and Gen X, a lot of home improvement happening. Influential brand. Their influence, major contribution, trustworthiness, and presence. 400 big box stores, big stores. Which brings us to the 10 most influential brands in this country, or at least some of them. Let's do a quick time check. Great. So I'd like to start, though, before I share with you what 6,700 Canadians thought, let's take a look at what people thought the most influential brand would be from the top. Which brand do you think was the most influential brand in 2021?
Pfizer.
Amazon.
Google. Netflix. Google.
So there's a few thoughts from the top. Now, were they right? Well, let's take a look at what we saw. Walmart. Walmart continues at number 10 to be focused on raising the quality of everyday life for Canadians. And the Why We Walmart campaign that Kristen Evans explained to me at length really kind of is a true expression of that proposition. It was a campaign that was largely based on testimonials, real Canadians outlining what they're going through and why they Walmart in effect. And effective. Investment in bricks and mortar, $500 million to modernize stores. Now, there's a big number that they're also investing beyond the stores and is associated with their e-commerce capacity. But again, not bricks and mortar going away, investment in bricks and mortar. They also saw an explosive growth in what they were doing online, as did a number of grocery retailers. And that's likely, as Kristen outlined to me in our interview, going to grow over the coming years. They also unveiled a Built for Better products program that makes it easier for those of us who want to shop for purpose-driven products. It's actually difficult to find some of those products. And so they've created a program that enables us to do that easier than we would otherwise. They opened a distribution center in Moncton, another couple of hundred jobs, again, important for the economy. The profile of their influence is clearly driven by presence. A lot of stores, large employee base, very healthy advertising budget, presence. They also over-index on trust. So this is what their profile looks like. And of course, when we look at some of the attributes associated with the brand, the light line on the outside being those associated with Walmart, the darker line on the inside being those associated with the other 136 brands, you can see that 6 in 10 Canadians see this as an established brand. They see it everywhere. It advertises a lot, and that's very clear to us. The 9th most influential brand in 2021 was Optimum, up 1 spot from last year, where it was number 10. Now, as most of you will recall, in 2018, the PC Plus and Shoppers Drug Mart programs merged, and that became what we now know as PC Plus. More recently, we saw Esso being added to the mix, increasing that presence. 2,000 Esso and mobile stations across the country. There's 18 million Canadians now with an Optimum card. 18 million. That's an enormous number. And of course, it's an enormous amount of data as well. As Megan Namath made very clear to me during our conversation, PC Optimum's journey has very much been around personalization. And again, the expression of that is in the My Point story, which was another great campaign that underlined that point. Integration of PC Optimum across the entire LCL family was also a point that she made very clear to me, and one again that is very, very much data-driven. This is a brand whose underlying basis is about data. Make no mistake. Its influence, and there's a halo effect here associated with the broader Loblaws organization, is driven by trustworthiness and, of course, engagement, because that's a fundamental in the loyalty world. It's a brand that people buy and use today. People think it has a strong future. It's highly recommended. Somewhere between 4 and 5 in 10 Canadians believe that to be the case, much more so than the other 136 brands that we looked at. And from an engagement perspective, we have somewhere between 20 and 35% of Canadians interacting with the brand online or would like to do so more often than they do now. The 7th most influential brand was Netflix, with that very familiar signature tune that you hear every time you're in the Netflix world. Netflix, of course, this year launched Squid Game, which ranks as Netflix's most watched show ever at 1.65 billion hours. Huge. This is a property that they paid just over $21 million for. Now the estimated worth is almost $900 million. So clearly there is value in putting money into original content. There is value in doing that. Their market cap surged at the beginning of COVID, then it stabilized. And of course, what we've also seen in the Netflix world is the fact that they've been changing how they measure the daily top 10. In fact, there was no measure prior to that. And some of the other streaming services still don't have a measure in place that is transparent in the way that the Netflix one is. We did see subscriptions decline in 2021 as people came out of hiding, so to speak. And one of the strategies that Netflix adopted to combat that was the addition of video games at no extra cost, I should add. Netflix chose Toronto as a location for their corporate office in Canada. Of course, they've been shooting a lot of stuff in Toronto as well, but again, adding jobs positive to the economy. What drives the Netflix influence? They over-index on being leading edge. They over-index on trust, and of course, they over-index on presence because they have an enormous number of subscribers in this country. They're seen as original, a trendsetter, and a brand that has forever changed the landscape. 4 in 10 Canadians believe that to be the case. Number 6 is Microsoft. Yes, Microsoft, I know every year I kind of hear hums and haws, but Microsoft has in fact been one of our 10 most influential brands in every year that we've run this program. Every single year. It's the 2nd most valuable brand in the world. And they surged in 2021, pushing their market cap to $2.5 trillion. Their stock actually gained for the 10th consecutive year. It's the longest rally ever. Puts them in double digits all of those years. Really tremendous performance. Cloud computing is the strength that fuels much of that revenue and profit. So it's a B2B play. Teams obviously clearly had a big impact. The active number of users doubled in recent times. They increased price, which was a kind of a gutsy move, but also had a positive impact on their stock price. And in November, Xbox celebrated its 20th year with record revenue. So Microsoft had an incredibly strong year in 2021. Its influence, the primary contributors to its influence are trust and still leading edge. And if some of the newer technology plays in the market, if their influence continues to be driven by being leading edge 50 years after the fact, then good on them. Microsoft is still seen to have a strong future. People buy it and use it today. It's dependable, much more so than for the other 136 brands on aggregate. And indeed, to underline the point, 4 in 10 Canadians see this as an innovative brand. It leads its competitors, and it has forever changed the consumer landscape. The second most influential brand in 2021 was Amazon. As its former CEO took a 10-minute flight into space, and that, of course, has been dubbed as the billionaire space race. I think that's a little harsh, to be honest, but that's what it was dubbed by much of the media. That said, Jeff Bezos did step down as CEO in 2021 to be replaced by Andy Jassy, who had previously led their web services, arguably the engine of much of what they do. It's the 5th most valuable company in the world, with a market cap of just shy of $2 trillion. And global revenue from AWS, advertising, and Prime this past year actually surpassed their retail sales. So, big moment for them. They are striving to be a great employer. And they've added to their core principles. I'm not sure they're there yet, but that is what they're striving to do. And indeed, in this country, they're hiring 15,000 employees, arguably at a higher wage rate, and at the same time eliminating their monthly bonus program, which I guess is a kind of a quid pro quo. What contributes primarily to the Amazon influence is being leading edge, where they way over index, and trustworthiness, which is still rather unusual for an e-commerce brand because there aren't many of them that over-index on the trustworthiness dimension. It's a brand that clearly is seen to have changed the consumer landscape, is changing our behavior, and leads its competitors. There are many other attributes that sit under the innovation and leading edge spectrum, but I've picked the 3 that are clearly the most differentiating. It's also seen to have a great future. People are buying and using it, more than 6 in 10 of us, and that it's a brand that understands our needs as consumers. For the 10th year running, 10 out of the 11 years that we've done this study, Google retained its number 1 spot. Here's a brand that is now surpassing the $2 trillion worth number, and a very exclusive club. This past year, they acquired Fitbit, and they're currently working on a Pixel watch that I have no doubt will compete with this thing that I'm wearing now. Google has revamped search to better allow us to connect, and the secret's out. They are moving to a location on King Street. They're bringing all of their assets in the city under one umbrella. I'm not sure if it'll be completed by 2022, more like 2023 at this rate. And they certainly announced a number of investments in the Canadian news ecosystem. So I guess the magic mix, if you like, if there is such a thing, for the most influential brand in Canada is that kind of leading edge, trustworthy with a dose of presence sitting in there. There's no question that this is a brand that's seen to have a strong future by 7 in 10 of us. People use this brand. It's a reliable resource. Google is part of our glue. It's innovative, it shapes our behavior, and it leads its competitors. And if I had to pick one attribute that really stands out for Google, more than it does for any other brand that we see, it's this one. 4 in 10 of us think that this is a brand that introduced me to something I never knew I needed. And again, I would reiterate the point that what brand wouldn't want to have that attribute? What brand wouldn't? So there you have it. The 10 most influential brands in Canada, Google, Amazon, YouTube, Apple, Facebook, Microsoft, Netflix, Visa, PC Optimum, and Walmart. Congratulations to those brands. I have 9 brief takeaways for you. The first is that brands that intersect in a relevant way with moments that matter. Moments that matter, they're the ones that are going to be influential. 2 is that the ability to read a room, the ability for a brand to understand what's happening, what's relevant out there now, and to adapt quickly to the public, that's a brand that will be influential. 3 is that the need is there to create and exchange value. That's what PC Optimum is doing, and they're doing it in a meaningful way. 4 is that every brand has to develop generational harmony. Brands can start by having influence in one generation, but if they truly want to influence the public in this country, they need to generate harmony. 5 is that brands that are not only trusted, but seen to be earning the trust of Canadians, those are the brands that are going to generate in more influence. 6 is that influential brands are always near us, maybe even in our pocket. 7 is that innovation that is anchored in assistance and helpfulness is more likely to generate influence. 8 is that influential brands are not only worth more, we've said that in the past, but they also appear to be pandemic proof. And 9, but not least, don't forget context. All brands live within a context. I'm going to leave you with a short clip that reflects our qualitative take on brand moments during the course of 2021. Thank you for your time. Ron, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks so very much, Steve. Good afternoon, I guess it is now. I'm Ron Lund, President and CEO of the ACA, which is the Association of Canadian Advertisers. And it's really my great pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker, Mr. Michael McCain. As you all know, Michael is President and Chief Executive Officer of Maple Leaf Foods, one of Canada's flagship food companies, with sales in excess of $4.3 billion and employing some 13,500 people in both Canada and the United States. Michael has devoted his career to the food industry, starting at McCain Foods in the late 70s, where he held a variety of roles, including President and Chief Officer of McCain Foods in the U.S. He joined Maple Leaf Foods in 1995. Since then, he has been instrumental in establishing Maple Leaf as a strong, sustainable, values-based company with leading brands and market shares across its businesses, and importantly, a bold vision for the future. In case you didn't know, Michael and his team are in fact trailblazers, with their deep commitment to being the global leader in sustainable proteins reflected in ambitious goals in the advancement of nutrition, reducing antibiotic use in livestock, animal care, environmental sustainability, and enhancing food security both nationally and globally. Mr. McCain is a director of McCain Capital and Maple Leaf Foods. He's a member of the Richard Ivey School of Business Advisory Board, the Business Council of Canada, and the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health Foundation. He's also the honorary chairman of Maple Leaf Centre for Action on Food Security. Born in Florenceville, New Brunswick, Michael attended Mount Allison University and received his honors in business administration degree from the University of Western Ontario. He also holds honorary degrees from Brock University, Carleton University, and Guelph University. I always say importantly because family is important. He's a devoted father to 5 children and family and lives in Toronto. And as you listen to Michael's keynote, you will see that, transformation is key to Michael's outlook. This was yet again recently captured in a January op-ed piece that he wrote for the Financial Post titled, "We Need a New Charter for Capitalism, and here's what it should include." I urge everyone to have a look at this op-ed. So without further delay, it's my indeed pleasure to introduce Mr. Michael McCain.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the very kind and overly generous introduction. Let me begin with a little caveat. I spent the early years of my career as a brand marketer, but in a much less sophisticated setting, and I've never really identified myself as a brand marketer, yet somehow I got invited to speak today, so you can go figure why that is so. In fact, I think my team would say that I know enough about the topic to be dangerous. And to an audience of marketers here today and advertisers and experts in their field, I guess that means there probably should be something of a health warning on the value that I can bring to you today. I thought the best place to start was talking a little bit about Maple Leaf and our business philosophy, and maybe giving you a sense then of how that ladders up to our brand and marketing efforts. As was described, Maple Leaf, I think, is a different kind of food company. We're an organization that grounds ourselves, roots ourselves in a business philosophy that rejects the primacy of shareholders, doesn't reject their interest, but the primacy of their interests, and is committed to creating enduring long-term value for all the stakeholders in balance. And that view of shared value creation is really critical or essential to who we are and how we behave and the future that we've staked out. For our organization, that's translated into a core belief system around our purposeful journey. We describe it as raising the good in food with a very bold and very specific vision to become the most sustainable protein company on earth. That's that I don't think would be considered wallpaper. It's very material. It defines everything that we do. It's very specific in its articulation, and it's something that we measure ourselves against constantly. As you can imagine, food, agriculture plays a significant role in the climate crisis. Roughly 30% of all global greenhouse gas emissions, and certainly our core business of animal proteins is at the heart of that, representing some 50% of those emissions. And it became clear to us that we needed to be part of the solution and not an ongoing part of the problem for the benefit of future generations. To that end, we have a comprehensive sustainability strategy that's defined broadly. One of the centerpieces, it's not the only, but one of the centerpieces happens to be the fact that Maple Leaf Foods in 2019 became the first, and I emphasize that, the first large-scale food company in the world to be carbon neutral now, not at some point in the future, not aspirationally, but carbon neutral now. And that's very important to us, very important, obviously, to the communities that we represent, but also a sense of pride to everybody in our organization. Our view of our ambition to be the most sustainable protein company on earth is not just, though, environmental sustainability. Our purpose is indeed embedded broadly in everything that we do, strategically, but also how we show up each and every day. It affects the food that we make. It affects how we care for the animals that are in our stewardship. It affects how we reinvest in strengthening our communities. It affects our culture and values reflected in our people strategies. Of course, financial stability and sustainability, building brands and expanding geographically, has to be a part of that as well. And yes, we've done our best to ladder all of this up into our core brand strategies, specifically our flagship brand, Maple Leaf, Schneider's, our emerging and disruptor brand, the Greenfield Natural Meat Company, and our plant protein brands, Light Life and Field Roast. In 2018, coming back to the marketing agenda, we recognized that we needed a wholesale brand renovation in our suite of brands and products. This was partially due to finding pathways to align our brand strategies with the purpose and vision that I just articulated, but it also was clearly required to establish a much clearer sense of the brand identity across our entire portfolio, being a house of brands and not a single branded house. At the time, we completed the most exhaustive brand strategy initiative that I've ever participated in across the 40-year history or career history that I've had in this industry. And it was backed by some of the most significant research, market research, competitive research, and consumer research that I've ever participated in and our category demanded. We focused all of our research on identifying category demand spaces that we could align brand strategies around. And two of our crown jewel brands, Maple Leaf and Schneider's, were relaunched with over 900 products re-engineered to match the defined demand space strategy hierarchy. One of the goals of this work, particularly in these two flagship brands, was actually to pull them apart. As we found over the prior decade that they'd homogenized to a degree that we felt was dangerous. In the first instance, we identified the likely single most important demand space for the category, which we described as responsible parenting. And the Maple Leaf brand was positioned uniquely against that demand space, accounting for a third of the total demand in the animal protein space. During these occasions, consumers are motivated by natural ingredients, real food, and family-friendly flavors. They care about all of the things that you would expect from a responsible organization. And they care about it in the sense of their family and community commitments. You've seen that show up over the last several years through very real and authentic parental narratives. There's no airbrushing, no classic CPG paper towel commercials here. There's no actors, just real, relatable messaging for parents who want to serve their families authentic food that they love without any of the guilt that sometimes is associated with that. In contrast, the Schneider's brand was clearly articulated to connect with the connect and savor demand space. It's motivated more by a non-parental moment, motivated by artisanal products and more artisanal, mature, cultural taste patterns. It's reflected in very authentic recipes, authentic ingredients and processes. Expert tastemakers panels were assembled to approve all of the products, and indeed taste reigned supreme in that brand strategy. And I must say, the product line does taste amazing. We spent the last 3 years embedding this positioning across the organization. We're thrilled with the results. They've been very impactful. We've transitioned brands from heavily weighted around nostalgia into premium and differentiated spaces with meaningful credentials, and our aggregate brand shares have grown steadily since then. In our sustainability journey, we've connected our purpose, our sustainability purpose, to our brand portfolio in ways that specifically suit each individual brand strategy. Our pure sustainable meat brand, the disruptor brand, is called the Greenfield Natural Meat Company. It's the only brand in the meat industry I'm aware of anywhere in the world that's done specific advertising campaigns advocating Meatless Mondays. The spearhead brand for our sustainability journey is featured by the benefits of raising animals without antibiotics, of which we are a leader in the world, by gestation crate-free animal production, humanely raised animal production. These are all incredibly important claims that are hard to communicate, and of course, communicating our carbon neutral position. In addition to that, we've taken some of our sustainability claims across other brands, specifically the Maple Leaf brand, in our carbon neutral on pack claim. In addition to connecting the Maple Leaf brand to all of our work around community engagement, specifically with respect to the work that we're doing in the Center for Action on Food Security. I think our teams have done a remarkable job at leveraging all of the media sources, the digital and mass media sources, to educate consumers on the pillars of what each brand represents. Lastly, I would say that what's important to me is that this belief system around shared value and our vision to become the most sustainable protein company on earth has indeed become a competitive advantage for us. We're excited about what it's doing for not just how we show up in the marketplace, but it's delivered pockets of very high growth for us over a longer period of time. It's created customer relationships that were unattainable for us in the past. It's strengthened our relationships with all of our external communities and stakeholders, including governments and NGOs, activist groups around the world. And it's become a central feature in our people strategy, attracting, retaining, and motivating the amazing people in the Maple Leaf team. We are hopeful, actually, that all of our actions will inspire other companies, not just in our space, but in all of food production, to imagine not just what's possible, but what we now know to be urgent. So with that kind of high-level summary, I thought it might be appropriate to take any questions that you have, and I'll do my best to respond to them.
Thank you. Thanks very, very much for that, Michael. We do have a couple of questions, but I'm going to actually start off with one of my own, I think, and that's really, you talked very much about you're already carbon neutral. obviously greenhouse, gas emissions are a big part of your kind of journey on that. How do you plan on reducing gashouse emissions further? Do you have some plans for that?
Yeah, that's we followed this. We followed a carbon management strategy that most of the scientific community around the world would endorse, which is the pyramid of avoid, reduce, recycle, and offset en route to carbon neutrality. Clearly, having a very robust component of significant reduction in your emissions is central to that pyramid. And we became in 2019 one of 290 companies in the world, the second company in Canada, the first in the food industry in Canada, to adopt science-based targets on our emissions reduction. We'd already were well on our way to a 25% reduction in our footprint, and we doubled down on that with our science-based targets through 2030 of 30% in absolute terms reduction in our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. When you look at our carbon strategy and the emissions inventory that we have today, there are, as you can imagine, hundreds of small emission points in a supply chain like ours. But there are two very large, overwhelmingly large and dominant emissions in that value chain. The first is in the field, in feed grains that we acquire, mostly. Secondly, in the manure. Actually, to be perfectly blunt, it's largely about pig shit, and the emissions attached to manure are mostly methane. And as a result of that, as some of you might know, methane is like 27 to 1 in its effects relative to carbon. So it's a very high impact emission. We have significant initiatives around both of those dominant emissions points in our supply chain that are game changers, absolutely scientifically game changers in how it will pivot our emissions profile over the next 10 years. The first is around regenerative agriculture. It's reimagining the agricultural processes that have been developed and utilized over the last 100 years into regenerative agricultural techniques that can convert an emission source into an actual sequestration of carbon, and that's why it's game changing. And the second is in all of the manure systems that exist in our supply chain is utilizing a technology around anaerobic digestion, which has the capacity to take this emission source and actually convert it, 100% of it, convert it to a renewable natural gas source. And so that large emissions point goes from defining your footprint into something that is a renewable energy source. And so they're very exciting. Again, those are the big strategic initiatives that will be game changers for us. But there's also the 1,000 points of light that we have across the supply chain, that are smaller impact, smaller single step impacts, which are important as well, but not clearly moving the needle like the two large strategic initiatives that we have in play. Regen ag, anaerobic digestion.
Yeah. And again, you can see the question, I think, came in there. If consumers don't seem to understand sustainability so much in the messaging, you mentioned earlier that you're really focusing on trying to get that through. Why do you include it in your brand's messaging?
That's a great question. In fact, early on in our journey, that was made very well known to us, to me personally, by our brand team. That the kind of message around Houston, we have a problem. Consumers are not really that motivated and don't understand the carbon strategy or sustainability messaging, and they're not motivated by it. So should we reconsider what we're doing? Our view at the time was no. We needed to commit to this journey because it was doing the right thing first, and then over a long period of time be prepared to educate consumers on why this is meaningful, why this, if not important to them today, why it should be important to them tomorrow, if not for themselves, for their children and grandchildren. And it's clear we're making some progress in that regard, but we're going to commit to this. We're going to commit to this in perpetuity, and hopefully, society will catch up to that in time. As the old saying goes, the Wayne Gretzky effect is going to where the puck is going to be, not where it is. And I think we're hopeful, fingers crossed, that's what will occur.
Thanks. I'm glad we got a little bit of time here because again, I mentioned at the end of my intro your charter for capitalism, and I know you've got some pushback on it, but I would if you have it, we do have a couple of minutes, so I think it's appropriate that you do share that with the audience a little bit about that, because again, it's not just shareholders play an equal role. I mean, they play an equal role amongst kind of 5 other factors. So, do you want to talk about what led up to the genesis of that in your own mind, and what kind of pushback are you getting?
Well, they're first of all getting lots of pushback from certain constituents and constituencies, and tremendous alignment from others. So, as you can imagine, I think the genesis of this was rooted in the fact that there's been a tremendous amount of diagnosis and hand-wringing over the challenges we face in the past decade, and those challenges are formidable. They're global in nature, and they affect generations. Our world's on fire. Levels of inequality and injustice are intolerable. Trust is declining at an incredible rate, and human conflict persists around the world. These are formidable challenges, and I think the evidence is clear that the confidence in what we've been comforted by the capitalist system in the last 100 years is coming into question. I'm not in my what I believe is that it's important that we not throw the baby out with the bathwater, that we don't reject all the goodness that's existed and what's been brought to us by what we know and believe in over the last 100 years, but rather seek a new charter of principles that will make a better version of the same thing. I identified in some of my thinking 6 principles. I don't necessarily have the conviction that those are exactly the right components, but I do have conviction that we need to change the channel from diagnosis into getting into very action-oriented, specific, results-focused actions and initiatives and principles that can solve the problem rather than continue to diagnose the issues. The pushback has been, very ideological. I personally believe that most of the pushback comes from the voice of change resistance. People that want to protect maybe a lack of accountability for change in the face of failure, and but I certainly recognize that these things need to be underpinned by lots of dialogue over some period of time, and that's that was my specific goal in this particular extreme, was to spawn the dialogue, to change that channel future focused rather than past.
That's great. Maybe one last question I'd like to ask you, actually, and that is, you again, in your introductory remarks, Sarah, you talked very much about, changing the value system, offering up and, here's the way we're going to do things. Was there a lot of inertia within the organization or resistance, or was this something that was easy to lead people to?
I think probably the most gratifying dimension of our work around defining our purposeful journey, which we launched inside the organization in 2019. Because we had been working towards so many of these initiatives for the prior 5 years and longer, many of the internal stakeholders reacted with an attitude of like, really, what's changed? Like, we're already doing all this. Like, nothing's new here. And to me, that was great news. So it said to me that we had an organization that didn't need to pivot from a change perspective. We didn't have a huge amount of change management on our hands. It was an organization that was clearly there strategically, and in the suite of initiatives that we were executing, we were just able to package it up in a way inside the organization that became much more inspiring as it migrated from strategy into purpose for what we do. And so, there are always some corners of the world inside and outside the organization that question it. But in my experience, to the extent that we add value to all of our stakeholders, not being a victim of the word or, but embracing the word and, that we can bring all of those stakeholders along in time. And that's what I think we've been successful at doing.
Great. And then one last thing, because I think we're just about running out of time. Do you have any last words of quick advice to the audience in terms of the ability to turn business strategy into marketing strategy as well as you have done?
I am an advocate of creating purposeful journeys in all the work that we do. I mean, we spend so much of our adult lives in a professional context, and answering the question, why do we do what we do, is not only constructive, productive, and rewarding commercially, but it's inspiring personally. And that's the ultimate test of a purposeful journey. Is it addresses each and every day the why do we do what we do question. And I would encourage all of the marketers in a micro sense and a macro sense to really embrace that question, why. And hopefully that will facilitate answers that work for you, but also work for the organizations that you donate your time to, or give your time to.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. McCain, for sharing gracefully so much of your time out of your busy schedule to be with us here today. And if we could all clap for you, I'm sure we would, but thank you again.
Thank you for your time. I enjoyed it very much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brett McIntosh. I'm the president of Publicis in Toronto, and really thrilled to be here this afternoon. I'd like to give a big shout out to all the Gen Xers in the audience, Steve and our Ipsos team. Thanks for recognizing this generation that's wedged between the influence of the boomers and that of Gen X and Gen Z so effectively today. So shout out to our Gen Xers. First of all, I want to thank Michael for taking that time with us today. Really helping illuminate for us what I think has been one of the most successful business and brand strategies over the course of the last few years, taking Maple Leaf and its many brands, a business that is imbued with heritage and in its DNA, and really bringing that self-disruption to the front and looking at changing consumer behaviors and striking a balance between the two, that forward-looking notion and drawing upon heritage in its influence. And so congratulations on that. And thank you for sharing your time with us today. And Ron Lund from the ACA, thank you for drawing upon your relationships to get someone as esteemed as Michael here with us. So, but what I'm here to do is introduce our next segment for today, which is our panel. We're thrilled once again as publicists to be partnering with the ACA, the CMDC, the Globe and Mail, and Ipsos for this segment of today's presentation. As in previous years, what we really try to do is reach out and find some of those leading business leaders and marketers in our industry to sit with us, chat with us, and share some insight and understanding to some of the topics, trends, and challenges that are facing us as influencers today. And when we look at how we're turning this corner, fingers crossed, how we're turning this corner and learning to live within the context and the reality of COVID, both in our personal lives and in our professional lives, today's an important moment for us to sit and chat and discuss about how what we've learned and what we've seen will influence our role as marketers as we emerge from this pandemic and move into an endemic stage. And to help us do that today, I'm going to introduce a friend, a colleague, a partner, CEO of Publicis Group, Andrew Bruce. Andrew Bruce is, as I mentioned, the CEO of Publicis Group in Canada. So with that comes the responsibility for all of our agency businesses and brands, from media to digital to PR, and of course, communications and creativity. And with that lens, Andrew gets a very strong view of the many dimensions of marketing across the funnel, across all its many challenges, and it can really serve his purpose well as the moderator of today's panel. Before returning to Canada, actually, Andrew was the CEO of Publicis Communications in the US. So he had responsibility for the entirety of our portfolio of creative agencies, from Leo Burnett, Publicis, Saatchi, and Fallon. And with that came the opportunity to dig into some of those large American businesses and brand challenges. Two of note were working with Walmart USA over the course of a 5-year period as they really sought to go toe-to-toe with the disruptors in their industry, such as Amazon, and traditional competitors like Target. Secondly, we also worked extensively, and still does, with T-Mobile in the USA, a real challenger brand. We all envy the positioning of the Un-carrier and how to lead disruption in a large and significant category. So we expect to see from Andrew today in his role as moderator, drawing upon these various experiences in his facilitation of the discussion. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew.
Thanks, Brett. I appreciate it. A lot of pressure just before we kick into the panel, but I'll do a very good job at pushing it on to the three panelists, which we're super excited about to have with us today. I had the privilege of moderating this panel last year. And so we are back to back with outstanding leaders that we're going to be able to ask some questions to and get some of their feedback. I have to be honest, I did not think a year later we would still be staring at a screen, hoping that my internet works, hoping that the light doesn't bounce off my head in a weird way, and hoping that I don't trip when I go through the questions that I have and the bios that I want to read to the talent that I want to introduce. So it's great to be back. Thank you, Steve Levy, for the inspiration that brings us all here today and for this study, which has been going on for some time now. A very, very powerful look at what all brands are trying to tackle as they work in today's rather unpredictable market. So my panelists with me today, I have Catherine Hay from Kids Help Phone. I have Tammy Sadinsky from CIBC, and I have Candy Lee from HelloFresh. So in no particular order, I want to very quickly, I've cut them back because the credentials of our three panelists are immense, and we need to use as much time as we can for questions, but I do want to give you a little introduction. So let me start with Kathy. As I said, Kathy is the president and CEO of Kids Help Phone, a recognized leader and pioneer in e-mental health and virtual care. Far more than a passionate professional calling, Kathy has made the organization's mission to always be open, providing a safe and trusted place for young people in any moment of crisis or need, a personal commitment. Kathy's dedicated to encouraging innovation and amplifying the voice of young people. Her success was recognized last year when Kathy received the 2021 RBC Canadian Woman Entrepreneur Award for Social Change. and the Arts 2021 Alumni Achievement Award presented by the University of Waterloo. Kathy's commitment to young people in the charitable sector is vast, extending to her volunteer work as a member of numerous boards, including a seat owner on the Ontario Premier's Sub-Office Council of Mental Health and Addiction. Prior to joining Kids Help Phone, Kathy was president and CEO of Women's College Hospital Foundation, where she advanced the health of women across Canada and reached record levels of support. Her success in this role led her to being named one of Canada's top 25 women of influence in 2017. Kathy is a passionate change maker in Canada with over 18 years of exceptional service in senior leadership roles within the not-for-profit sector. Kathy, we're thrilled to have you with us. Thank you for joining. I'm going to go over to Tammy Sadinsky. She's the Senior Vice President, Brand and Marketing with CIBC. Tammy oversees CIBC's brand as well as the planning, delivery, and measurement of their client-focused marketing programs and campaigns. Tammy was most recently the Vice President, Marketing Communications at Walmart, and this gives me a chance to plug the number 10 influential position in her work there in shaping that brand. She was responsible for Walmart Canada's overall brand voice, Marcom strategy, advertising, and social media presence across all customer touchpoints. And prior to joining Walmart, Tammy was Chief Marketing Officer at Tim Hortons, Canada's largest QSR. Prior to Tammy worked with General Mills in both Canada and the US. Tammy's marketing accolades range from Canada's top 30 under 30 marketers to winning multiple campaign and marketing awards recognized by our industry's most reputable organizations and publishers. Tammy is deeply engaged within Canada's marketing industry as an acting board member for the Association of Canadian Advertisers and was most recently appointed to the Marketing Advisory Committee of the Canadian Red Cross. Tammy, as a fellow Walmart alum, I'm thrilled to have you here and really looking forward to the experience that you bring across packaged goods to QSR to finance. So it's wonderful to have you with us. And last but not least, we have Candy Lee, who is the CMO of HelloFresh. HelloFresh is focused on disrupting and transforming the traditional food industry. As a recipient of Marketing Magazine's Top 30 Under 30 as well, along other industry marketing trends, Candy has a track record of jumpstarting brands, companies, and teams, both big and small, global and local. Her background ranges from managing such brands as Budweiser and Bud Light to driving hyper-growth at tech companies such as Ecobee and Travelzoo. Beyond the accolades, what Candy is most passionate about is how marketing can become a big bet and competitive advantage for an organization. From working on scaled corporate turnarounds to helping tech startups establishing a marketing function and a market presence. Candy is an advocate for female equality in the workplace through past work with the Lean in Canada, leading their expansion into the nationwide, multi-city, non-profit entity they are today. Candy also sits on the board of Meal Exchange, a nonprofit organization devoted to inspiring and empowering students to create healthy, just, and sustainable food systems. So as you can see, we have an outstanding panel here with us, and I can't forget my friend Steve Levy and his funky glasses, which are staring me right in the face here. Steve is here, obviously having been so close to this study to help pepper in and support the conversation that we have with some of the what the study revealed. So I know last year this time evaporated, so I'm going to jump right in. And I'm going to start with a very broad question, because what we want to do is we want to go through the pillars of influence and try and cover as much of those as we can. Before getting to that, I'm going to throw out a question for our panel here. And heads up, Tammy, it's coming to you first. But the question is this. As a marketer, what does influence mean to you? Has the definition changed over the last 2 years? And the second part of that, what are the enduring shifts that you're seeing as the pandemic prolongs?
Excellent. And I'm not sure you can use top 30 under 30. It's been so long. So thank you, Andrew. I think it's a great question. You know, I was reflecting on it. Influence to me is really what we are charged to do as marketers for our brands and our business. It involves, changing views, changing perspectives, the capacity or the capability to have an effect on someone's beliefs. And in most cases, try and get them to take some action. right, related to our businesses or our brands. In my opinion, the definition itself has not changed over the last 2 years, but the how we do this has changed. And what we say, where we say it, what we do, and how we show up, that has changed. And so, I think I was reflecting on, back in, my career, and I can sure everybody can relate to this. We're all very familiar with marketing influence levers, right? But it's the addition of the social influence levers that I think is really here to stay. And I think you heard that in Michael's presentation. Prior to joining CIBC, where I am now, I was at Walmart. And once upon a time ago, it would have been enough to just market everyday low prices, get people into your store, the traffic that you needed, and even get them coming back again and building their routines. Not enough anymore. Right at the beginning of the pandemic, and I would never have anticipated seeing this in a study, but the drivers to store choice, the number one driver was a safe environment. And consumers wanted to be able to trust that you were taking the right actions to make sure their shopping experience was safe. So as you think about, once upon a time ago marketing levers and their influence, it's now coupled with so many more considerations that are important to helping drive the kind of influence you need to drive.
It's interesting, Tammy, because I was taking notice. Steve was talking about our top 10. And as you walked us through those, Steve, what constantly came up was trustworthiness. It seemed to be a one or two of the primary attributes in most of the brands that you shared with us. So it's telling that in a time of uncertainty, that's what people hold on to, and that's what brands need to establish and look for and look to. Candy, do you have anything to add to that, to the meaning of influence during this time, and certainly what HelloFresh does living in that virtual world?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Brett. It's interesting you sort of left off your comment with trust, because I think certainly for those that aren't aware, HelloFresh is a weekly subscription meal kit service, and we really think about dealing a lot with trust. People are trusting us to keep their families fed and nourished. People are trusting us to give us their home address to ship to every single week. Some fans in the house maybe, but as I think about the word influence, maybe my slight pivot on that is it's actually not a word we use too often in-house within our marketing group. I think we tend to more think about our role as a marketing team really becoming more of a partnership to our end user or our end customer. So for us, it's really about the sense of partnership and the sense of product education. Sort of why product education? I think part of it is just where we're at from a category and where we're at in terms of our product life cycle. We're still a relatively new product. We're still in the process of explaining what the heck a meal kit is to a lot of people. And so step one before you even build any influence is just making sure there's that shared understanding of what is HelloFresh, what is a meal kit. So that underlines everything that we do. But what we really try to focus on, and maybe our slight bent to influence, is partnership. How do we, at a time where families are really struggling, obesity is up, it's hard to find time to cook at home, how do we be a true partner to our customer and lead our growth through a great product utility and product experience? So for us, it's sort of part product education, and then in a part just being a good partner and having that two-way dialogue instead of one-way influence. Put something out there, hear the feedback back, get the data, iterate, and sort of keep improving from there.
It's interesting because when you say partnership, it almost feels like a really nice umbrella to some of these pillars of influence, such as engagement, which is central to partnership, or the trust that we talked about in establishment. Your very presence, all of these things play into that notion of partnership. And I feel like it's a word that is thrown around so much, but it's probably never more important right now when we think about the attributes of trust where this thing sort of started. So Kathy, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that before we jump into the attributes, or we can just get right at it. But with, kids' help phone, and you think about the presence and the influence you want to have in those lives at those critical moments, it must mean a lot. It must be a much broader notion for you.
Yeah, thanks. I do have a couple of things that I first want to put it out there that I feel incredibly intimidated being a non-marketer speaking in front of all of you, but I really appreciate Michael McCain's comment that business strategy actually equals marketing strategy, and then that dialogue around purposefulness. I just have the privilege of working for an organization that's steeped in purpose, which is youth and mental health. And for those that don't know Kids Help Phone, we literally don't really have a competition in the work we do because we're the only 24/7 e-mental health solution in the country that's national. But we have tons of competition in the funding model and how we pay for what we do, as well as multiple different stakeholders. But the thing that strikes me about what we've been talking about is on the table is the pandemic that hit 22 months ago. And quite frankly, every single thing changed in the globe, and including every part of Canada. And I think that's really important for us, either as business strategists or marketers, to constantly remember this is not a steady state. Steady state will stagnate any company, actually, at any given time. So I just want to remind folks that coming out of COVID with big brand influence that you all have, we interacted with young people more than 9.6 million times since COVID began, in comparison to 1.9 million times in 2019. So big, huge footprints that we all have through all of this. There is a sense of, dare I be melodramatic, trauma that all your consumers are experiencing right now. And so authentic brands stand, I think, if you're looking at enduring shifts through all of this. And trust is the anchor to all of that. So that's all I have to say for now.
Well said. And Kathy, back to your quick introduction about branding. I always think, that quite frankly, what we do with the toolbox that we have is we take business strategy and business aspirations and objectives, and we are the conduit that brings them and hopefully connects them to the consumer. It's nothing more complicated than that. Perhaps the tools and the data that inform it along the way get a little steeped, but there's no question that everything we do is in service of what you do and the vision that you set as CEO of organizations and where that company's going. I want to move on to the first pillar, engagement. And we didn't do this in any particular order. Apologies to Steve if we've broken rank here. But the important thing that we want to jump into was engagement, and the fact that it feels, for me anyway, and I'm sure for all of us here, that we have had so many stop and starts. We open, we close, we think we're back in a month. No, we're not. We're locked down again. And, I think what's interesting is we've had these moments where we've had to think about how fast we need to move when it looks like things are going to open up again. So like last summer, before the Omicron wave came in the fall to us. And I'm interested to know what meaningful change in consumer behavior did you witness as things start to look like they were going to open? And are there early indicators that come from that we see what the world could look like in this post-pandemic period? I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get at is there a way to capture a new normal? Are you starting to feel as leaders, as marketers, that you can see what your world might look like on the other side of this? And so maybe if I can throw that back to you, Tammy, just to tackle first and then from there.
Sure, and hopefully we're on that rise again, right? Of coming out of this soon. But, having had the opportunity to work for two essential service companies with Walmart and CIBC, both of which, at the time pre-pandemic, were on their omni-channel kind of strategy roadmap, right? We've got the bricks and mortar, the digital footprint. There were plans to accelerate digital at the pace for which consumers were adopting it, while keeping the bricks and mortar relevant. But certainly as home became our home base, so to speak, the acceleration was nothing like we had anticipated. And there was a very big hurry up on the insides of the organization to catch up to what consumers needed at that time. It's amazing what you can do from your couch now, whether that's to grocery shop or financial services or whatnot. But, home became our hub, and the organizations I was part of had to catch up. Even in the moments of possibility when things were starting to open, the digital adoption stickiness did not change. And so to me, this is an indicator that this will be part of our new normal, right? I think consumers experienced the convenience. They got over some of their learning curves because they had to. And in many cases, I think they've built new routines as part of their life, routines that save them time, routines that save them money. And so those are the kinds of behavior shifts and new experience models that I think will be well into our future and into perpetuity. On a related note, I would also say this concept of DIY, do it yourself. And I think the pandemic brought that on as well, which is really about where the consumer is in the control seat, frankly, whether that's choosing self-checkout versus having somebody ring in their groceries, or doing their finances on their own, on their app, on their laptop, and looking at, applying for new banking products, et cetera. The humanity is not necessarily necessary anymore. And so I think people realize the value of time savings and built some confidence in their abilities to service their own needs if we simply provided the right experience for them to do that. So I do believe that we will see that into the new normal phase.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hear myself in your words when I think about my own behavior through there. Kathy, I want to ask you a specific question about engagement too, because if we think about how things start to open up, I know as somebody that oversees a group of leaders that in turn manage about 2,500 individuals in the Canadian market here, that it's been tough. It's been tough to be locked down. A lot of our younger employees, they live inside one-bedroom apartments and haven't been able to get out. They long for that connection that happens in the office. And as I think to Kids Help Phone, I think about these shifts and changes and like, oh my gosh, we're about to be able to get back out. We can go for a meal and we can see our friends and then just have that turn and lock down. How has that impacted your level of engagement with you?
Well, that's a really interesting question for an organization like Kids Help Phone. And I do want to touch back to something Tammy said about humanity and experience. But because we have always been digital, we've been doing this for 30 some odd years. We've always been a digital environment for anyone connecting to us. And we're I suppose a brand that is well used to responding to crisis. And so we're constantly, and we all kind of react to the words pivot and being nimble. It's buzzwords. But I think as marketers and as a company like Kids Help Phone, pivoting and being nimble is the name of the game. So as I look back on our increasingly big focus on innovation and technology, we in fact a few years ago decided at the board table, at the executive table, and through the organization that we actually weren't a youth charity. While we do the function of a youth charity, we're actually an innovation charity or brand with a razor sharp focus on youth and mental health. It sounds like a nuance. It was words in different places, but it unlocked a whole bunch of different thinking, a different business model for us, a different way we spoke to our consumers, whether it's youth or donors or government, caring adults, and a different way to structure ourselves. So all that to be said, as the ebbs and flows of COVID and this pandemic happened, I remind folks that things are happening all the time. The Humboldt bus crash, if I bring that to the table, was a traumatic experience for Canada. At Kids Health Phone, we saw a spike on our platforms right away and continued. And what we see, which I find interesting from a brand perspective, is then when we get spikes, we never really see it go down to, I air quote, normal, because behavior changes. Young people figure out help-seeking behavior. It feels right. When 2020 hit, all we think about is the pandemic. The fires in Australia, for example, all over the news, horrific images. Young people consumed them in incredible ways. Spike went up again. Airplane crash, spike went up again. Crash, a terrorist attack, 62 families impacted. Kobe Bryant's helicopter crash created a big spike in change in behavior in youth across Canada. And then the pandemic hit. So I guess as a brand, we're responding to crisis all the time. And my big message, if there is one in there, well, I hope there is one in there, is that the need to continually innovate is not unique to Kids Health Phone. I think it's unique to all brands. And if I remind folks of Kodak and Kodak paper and digital photography and where they chose to live, and hence they're not a power player at all. Kids Health Phone does not want to be the Kodak of the not-for-profit charitable sector. So we're constantly innovating as a solution that has an intimate impact in relationship with our consumers. Don't know if that was what you asked.
Perfect. I was actually talking about Kodak this morning. It's so funny that it would come up twice in one day. And talking about those massive brands, Tammy, I think of a Walmart that I spent a lot of time on as well, like you, that, didn't necessarily move fast enough because it feels like it comes at a cost to the massive business that is already in play and in the market and the flexibility. Steve, I know I'm taking too long and we've got some other pillars to get through, but I want to ask you a quick question. You can jump in on engagement. You talked about the top gainers, and I was quite thrilled to see Loblaw there. I wasn't surprised to see TikTok or Skip the Dishes or these sort of disruptive brands that find their connection and find their relevance. But Loblaws must have moved incredibly fast during this period of time. Is there any additional insight to that sort of engagement and speed that happens? I'll call them from, traditional brands to new world brands and how they live in the world.
Well, I think they did a few things and that showed up for us in the study. I mean, they did move fast. Clearly, the public responded positively to the things that they were doing. Tammy mentioned safety. That was perhaps at the top of their list. They orchestrated different procedures and processes in their stores very quickly. And again, as I think a couple of people have mentioned here, there were initiatives that they had in play that were perhaps 3-year initiatives that turned into 3-month initiatives. Now, does all of this result in bricks and mortar going away? It absolutely doesn't. It doesn't mean that. What it perhaps does mean, both for grocery retail, since you asked me the Loblaws question, but for anyone that has a footprint, is perhaps a change in the way that footprints are used. Will banks look different in the future to the way they do now? I think they will. Does Loblaws already look different? I often use an example of the Loblaws on the corner of Bayview and Moore, close to where I live. There's a Starbucks inside the Loblaws now. The footprint is the same size, but there's another component to it. How many different and interesting ways are we going to see footprints change in the near future? I think we are.
That's really interesting. Okay, I'm glad we're going to get to trust because it has come up so many times with different synonyms to describe it. But I want to talk about brands and how they navigate uncertain times. It seems like many actually have flourished. They've never had better business results than they have of late. At the same time, consumers expect and demand more from brands. Transparency, social good, and so on. We've talked about that. And as you move to a more digitally enabled relationship, how do you continue to build and nurture the kind of trust that seems to me, and perhaps because of my age, it can be more easily established within a physical environment versus digital. Kathy, can we go to you? Because I think about you being 100% virtual and building that trust and how important that is at such a vital moment for your, I don't know, I wouldn't call them trust. What do we call them? Guests?
Service users, not guests, not clients, young people who need us. I suppose service user, if you're inside the house. It's interesting because we have been doing this for a long time. I love poking fun at some of my research colleagues in university hospitals that talk about virtual care. And it is a big buzzword, as it should be, because it can provide a health system solution to our healthcare system. And the reality is Kids Help Phone was one of the pioneers in virtual care by nature of a telephone and a professional counselor and a young person in need somewhere in the country. So we've been doing virtual care a long time, and do I overstate that innovation is part of it? I'll just leave it at that. You know that. But the same tenets that I think you all approach your clients, consumers, folks that you care about, stands in the digital world, in the virtual care world. And it is anchored against relationship and the relationship you will have with, in our case, a young person or a caring adult, or a donor, or a corporate partner, or government. Basically, our target market is everybody. So try being our agency and deal with us. But regardless, at the base of all of that is trust. And relationships can only go so long without that trust being further enhanced and deepened. And in there, you've got to do what you say. You've got to add value. I think of it in three things. I like to narrow things down to critical few because I can't think bigger than that. But if you think of the critical few things in a digital environment, in our case, dealing with someone's mental health, I worry about, is the experience good for that young person? Because that counts. Is the outcome good for that person? Because if it isn't, then you're doing harm. That's and then at the end of the day, your accountability to your stakeholder is around, are you doing it in a cost-effective way? So if the experience is good, the outcome is good. Let me just rephrase that. Better, experience better, outcome better, and cost effectiveness better. You will end up deepening the trust that you have with your stakeholder. I believe that anyway. And then the final thing, and before I take up too much airtime, co-creating things at Kids Help Phone is important. So we co-create our products and our access points and our new delivery pathways with those that use it. So young people or caring adults. And trust is a big deal in there. We're not lip serving, saying, hey, tell us what you think. And, oh, by the way, here's the product we're putting in front of you. No lip service allowed. We have to co-create. And in the charitable sector, trust is not a given. And in fact, you all will know, I'm sure, that trust has been eroding in the not-for-profit charitable sector over the last few years. And for me, it's a big concern because you stand in your values, you make your decisions in your values. And if your trust is eroding, at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to do the right and good work you're supposed to do. So all I say on that is double down on all the work. I say to our people, double down on all the work we do around relationship, trust, transparency, and that. Back to your original question around digital, and it's no different. It's just maybe you have to work harder in the digital environment, and maybe not. I mean, the world is changing, so that's all I'm going to say.
Right. That's great. Hey, Tammy, I'm going to send it over to you. It's interesting I think you can probably talk of it from a Walmart perspective, from a CIBC perspective. I know for financial institutions, trust is certainly a big hot button. I think for me personally, I took a lot of pride in 08, 09 in the subprime, where the trust measures for Canadian banks kind of rocketed for the first time in a long time. But I think during this period of time, when there is, so much difficulty and hardship, how you partner, how you build that trust is important. Do you have any comments to share on the back of Kathy there?
Yeah, I do. So certainly, our brands and our consumers, or even I should say our consumers, are holding us to very, very high standards, probably standards unlike ever before. And, I think the first message I would say is it comes down to making sure you get the fundamentals right in your value proposition. You need to deliver with consistency. You need to deliver with quality. You need to have the right CX and a assured and consistent CX that meets consumers' needs. So that's table stakes. And even as we, continue to, be part of a more digitally enabled world, your value prop and delivering it consistently and seamlessly for the consumer must be a core focus for every organization. At the same time, I also see, beyond the commerce that we're doing, consumers expecting more accountability out of brands. They're looking for, how do we leverage our scale for the greater good as a way of trusting us and trusting our intentions. They're looking to see if we share the same values as they do as consumers. And they're picking their brands no longer on, key facts or benefits alone, but now about a sense of shared values with the brands and businesses that they choose to spend their time with and their money with. So, this comes back to what many of you have said, and, part of what Michael was hitting on earlier too, which is we do need to communicate a strong sense of purpose. Why are we here? And what are we here to do for you every single day? And even more than that, more than just communicating it, that's intention, right? Sharing intention is one thing, but you also have to demonstrate action. This is that good old be, do, say. I love whoever coined that. It's not enough to just talk about it anymore. Action is what legitimizes it. And if they're holding you to higher standards and you're meeting them in the everyday in a much more digitally driven environment, then over and above all of that, they need to know how you are making a difference in the communities they live in for the good.
What's interesting, I was thinking as you were talking through that response, and thank you, Tammy, is that I've had the great privilege to work with many outstanding and iconic brands. And for each of them, we typically have our brand framework, which has the purpose in it and the mission in it. And in many cases, sadly, or at least in the past, they would hang on a wall in the lobby of the organization. And if I think now to the brands that are really making a difference, they live inside the individuals. They start from within the organization. They are lived out every day. And so therefore, the focus and the care that needs to be put into such a purpose and articulated becomes more important than it's ever been, with customers keeping us and holding us to such high standards. I want to quickly jump ahead. And before I do, to our 1,100 watchers out there, please feel free to throw in any questions you have. I'm going to keep going. I could spend hours, as you can probably already tell, with the panelists here talking through what's happening at this particular time. But if you have a question, throw it in, and I'll do my very best to find a way to integrate it into our conversation here. We still have some time. But I do want to, Tammy, ask you a question about influencers. Steve, you talked about that. We looked at the emergence of influencers within marketing and the role they play. To be honest, I was a little surprised that it wasn't a hockey stick. I think there's a lot. We talked about brand safety. I think that probably plays into it a little bit. But if we look at influencers and their increasing role in the marketing mix over the last number of years, how have we managed or that balance of the risk and reward of turning over your brand to an influencer? I'm sure everyone here has thought about it. and has that sort of stalled moment where is this the right thing for our brand? What's your observations on that, Candy?
Sorry, Candy or Tammy?
Candy. Sorry, I'm throwing it
Okay.
over to you, Candy, on the influencers. Did I
just
say
realized
Tammy?
we have such similar sounding names.
Oh.
Yours way
No,
more delicious.
no, definitely. I would say, to a certain extent, we were digital from day one. That's sort of, our business model is direct to consumer. And so maybe because of that approach with our go-to-market, I think influencers have just naturally always been a part of our marketing playbook, especially if you think about the fact that we were trying to build product category awareness, brand awareness. We were basically starting from zero, and it became really critical for us as a company and a brand that when you're starting from a brand awareness of zero, you kind of need like third-party validation, third-party, reviews, and influencers play such an important role in that because they were helping spread the word about HelloFresh. So I would say for us, in terms of, balancing and managing the risk and reward, it could be just a little bit of the fact that we tend to see ourselves as a bit of a challenger brand. So I think the extension of that is we naturally feel quite comfortable with taking on risk, and it's like a little bit of high risk, high reward. And we certainly try to, coach and counsel our marketing teams to, be in love with risk and take smart risks. But I also think, brands are just meant to be experienced by users. Brands can't be like a one-way communication. And, who better to actually show that message and amplify it by having influencers talk about their experience, talk about the discovery of the product and the brand. And so I think, it sort of, I think for us, it was fairly intuitive from day one to have influencers be a part of our marketing journey. I think we try not to worry too much about the risk element. I think in part because risk is a little bit part of our DNA. But I think also in part, and this actually maybe goes back to what Tammy was saying around having the right fundamentals. Like we also just feel like we have a product with like a strong user experience, strong CX that we can stand on 2 feet on. Like there's, not everyone needs to love us, but we're also quite confident that when we work with influencers or even pitch for earned media, that, okay, well, we really think and we really tried hard to make this a product that no one will probably want to shit on. And so I think for us, making sure you have the confidence in your product is probably the ultimate risk reduction. And I think for us too, like a big priority for us is leveraging influencers to induce trial. And even just the idea of asking people to try is inherently risk reducing. Like we're not getting you to sign on to a 3-year contract. It's like, hey, try a box of HelloFresh. It's pretty light lift, low risk. It's basically meals for a week. And so I think we've been able to find different ways to de-risk, but I think also just it maybe just lines up really nicely because we were born on the backs of just being digital first.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the last question before we open it up to all of our viewers. I have a big parking lot of questions, so if we don't get to those, then we'll keep going. The pandemic has accelerated the online exchange of products and services. At the same time, the traditional customer journey within any given category has become increasingly non-linear. How are you managing this as an organization? Can I ask you that, Tammy, if I think about that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. Boy, this is, it is really hard. And I think probably one of the biggest challenges we all collectively face as marketers. I'd start by saying we take, I would say, 2 approaches, like many of you probably do too, and it's an and approach, okay? So the first is we look at the macro behavior changes, mindset shifts, decision-making differences, informed by, of course, our insights analytics, to ensure just we understand the big shifts in once thought the consumer journeys were to where they might be now, and what are some of those common threads. And this is really to make sure that, we drive the right awareness and consideration and relevance and connectivity that's right for our brand. So what are the big common behavior shifts that we need to be thinking about in the consumer journey? But that's not enough. And so, as mentioned earlier, consumers do expect more from us as brands. they expect us to also know them as individuals. And that's tough, right? I think back to when I started 25 plus years ago, you were marketing to the masses. You didn't know anybody. You didn't really know anybody when it came to who your bullseye consumer was. You just knew ish. And they're expecting us to serve them at an individual level. And that too has become table stakes in the last little while. And, this needs to be a strong part of our marketing operating model on a go-forward basis. We need to be getting to greater levels of precision in understanding our consumers and understanding it with data and analytics. We talk a lot about that probably with all of our teams. Having a capability for personalization is a must in this next day and age, because they expect us to know who they are and they want us to meet them on their terms. It's critical, analytics, trigger-based messaging, agile test and learns. This is all part of our new vernacular that helps us get sharper in the journeys and where we're meeting them with the right messaging and the right channel mix, so to speak, marketing mix. So it's a 1-2 punch, I would say, as far as how we're doing this.
Excellent. Thank you, Tammy. I'm going to ask a question from our audience, and it brings us back to the influencer topic. And I don't know, Steve, if you can kind of very quickly jump on this, and we'll see if there's response to it, because it feels like you're the one perhaps closest to it. But when we look at the proliferation of influencers being used in marketing, has there been any drop in their perceived trustworthiness by the consumer?
So there's two parts, I think, to the answer to this question. The first part is about evolution. So if I think back, 8, 9, 10 years, even I was skeptical about influencer marketing. It was raw. It was perhaps very risky. In some respects, this was a group of people who were generating an audience and an income, a relatively low income along with it. That's changed dramatically. It's changed dramatically. Now we have influencers who have big audiences. They have agents. It's become a sophisticated business now. They don't make their money on YouTube. They make their money on deals with brands. And the risk has been significantly reduced relative to the way that it was when I was skeptical about it. I'm no longer a skeptic. Now I'm an advocate. So that's one comment. The second comment is, even with that, there are blips. There are blips, and there have been blips, in the last 2 or 3 years where there's clearly been, fraudulent scenarios. And does that give brands pause for thought? It does, and it should. But I think we're evolving, and that the world of influencer marketing is becoming part of the glue of marketing that won't be going away. As it becomes more sophisticated, less risky, and dare I say, less authentic.
Interesting. Yeah, it's been certainly, I would imagine, for everyone here, a big topic. And I thought, Candy, this connects back to your question, that risk reward. I don't know if for Kathy or Tammy, if this is, if you have a response to this as you think about how important trust is and what it means. It's interesting what you say, Steve, that these big influencers have big audiences, and they themselves must now carefully watch their own brand in order to make sure they can continue to monetize that and manage that. But would there be anything to add?
Yeah, the only thing I would... Go ahead.
You go ahead, Tammy. I have an opposite view that I'll put, not an opposite view, but a different perspective that I'll put after.
Yeah, just a brief remark. Thank you. For us, it really comes down to authenticity and alignment to the brand's values. You start to rid yourself of risk if you know you are kind of squarely aligned there. And then it's about who is their audience and how much is that aligned with the DNA of your brand. We've got Connor McDavid as one of our influencers. He has banked with us since he was a child, and as has his family. And he can authentically speak to how his experience with CIBC and the various products and services have helped him, in his life, as well as, evangelize that to up and coming, athletic professionals. And so it really comes down to the authenticity and the deep wiring these influencers have for our products and services that can help feel like it's insulating you a bit.
Sounds like a lot of work needs to be done before you make those decisions to carefully align yourself. Kathy, a controversial alternative perspective, or is that too much?
It's probably not controversial, but just a different perspective. So Kids Health Phone as a brand is actually often sought after to align with other brands as an influencer. It is not a bad thing to have Kids Health Phone co-branded with anybody, because we are speaking to young people in every corner of Canada all the time. We have a warm brand. So as Kids Health Phone, I actually have the same words you said, Tammy, is when we align our brand with CIBC at the start of COVID. Thank you very much. And that didn't sound authentic. Thank you very much for that. That authentic alignment is really, really important, because as we align our brand, we're bringing 8.5 million young people with us, for example, and all of their families. So that's something that we recognize. We're actually an influencer, not like Connor McDavid. But on the other side, we also deal with lots of influencers like that. The NHLPA is a big, huge supporter of Kids Health Phone, and the NBA, and so same sort of thing. The Olympian athletes are amazing. So we do use them because it inspires our young people. But the other thing that I just wanted to drop on the table is the impact of the influencer on certainly our consumers, if I use that word. Every time there's something big, and dare I say traumatic, someone takes their life, dies by suicide or trauma, in the influencer world, we see on our platforms the impact to our young people. So the reach, we actually staff up when we see in the news some critical situation that's happening. So no controversy there, just the impact. I agree with you, Steve. The impact of influencers is here. It is huge. And certainly the young person is deeply impacted and influenced by an influencer.
That's you commented on this earlier about when events unfold and the impact it has on the youth, and it strikes me that for you, influence is a very, very, it's much more than just sort of a marketing opportunity. It changes your organization. It speaks to the actual inherent power of influence, because it has the ability to trigger individuals and really impact it, which is fascinating. I want to move on to another question, and I think Steve is naturally the one to perhaps kick this off, and then we'll find out what it means to the others in their organization. But it's in capitals, Steve. So when will sustainability become one of the drivers of influence? What has to happen? Local climate catastrophe? So I had another question I'm not going to get to, but I talked to that about some who flourish despite being poor corporate citizens of sorts. Why is that, and how does this rise to the top? So sustainability, will it show up in our influence study one day?
Well, in actual fact, it does already, because each of those dimensions is made up of a number of different things. And the dimension that we currently call corporate citizenship, part of that is about sustainability. So part of my answer is, yes, it's already there. The other part of the answer is, there comes a point when some of these dimensions have to split, because there's a bigger thing within it that needs to be a standalone. Now, I can't tell you when that'll be. Maybe it'll be next year. That corporate citizenship goes away and it becomes two things. And maybe one of those things is the environment or sustainability, or you fill in the blank. I don't know what it would be yet.
Interesting. For our panel.
I feel like I'm a broken record here, but it's a very interesting dialogue that I'm sure you all speak about is around ESG and sustainability. I remind you all, because we are data driven, we speak to kids every day. I can tell you what they were worried about yesterday across the country. And every day they talk about social injustice. They talk about climate change and fear for the future. So don't, I sound like I'm pontificating or parenting. Just remember that the power of a young person's interaction with their future is a big driver for sustainability, I think. From a brand perspective, I'm losing my steam here for sure, but I'll turn it over to Tammy and Candy. I just say there is a lot of power in your brands if you authentically align towards sustainability and climate justice.
Yeah, just anecdotally, because you were talking about children, I got very shunned by my 12-year-old as I was putting crackers in a Ziploc bag, and he was absolutely not going to bring a Ziploc bag to school. It was only going to be in a reusable Tupperware. And I was like, there we go. Okay. But to your point, the passion is real. And I do think it's part of the DNA now of the younger generations. But I also think it's an expectation across the generations now. I do believe, and the way we look at it at the bank is, this is going to be and is a core lever to trust. What are we doing for the greater good of our clients' communities? How are we using our scale for good to impact climate and take action in doing it? We need to do more than just, financial services. We need to help make our clients' ambitions real within the communities that they live in. And that goes for the environment, that goes for privacy, that goes for, sustainable communities. So no, this to me becomes a much more strategic part of our proposition as a business and brand. And it actually becomes part of the narrative that we need to be talking about, but also operationalizing against.
Right.
I think that,
hey, Tammy, sorry, Steve, jump in, please.
I was going to say, I think we need to be a little careful. When we talk about ESG, we often talk about it as if it's one thing, when in actual fact, it's three things. It's three different things. And if you were to look at the media exposure of those three things, the G gets basically nothing. The E gets almost all of it. But in actual fact, the public cares most about the S.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's not
interesting.
one thing, it's three things.
And I would tell you, as a marketer, as a conversation we're having, we know much better how to market the S. Don't know quite how to market the E as relevantly as we need to, especially if it's not in a very obvious link to our brands, but we do plan to make a difference.
Yeah. All right, I have got to go on to the last question, but before I do, one last thought for Tammy. When your 12-year-old loses the recyclable container, you'll have your back. Quick last question. Have you seen the influence of marketing change within your own organizations? Do you see that continuing to change as we emerge from the pandemic? Candy, can I throw it over to you? We know marketing is obviously central to it, but are you at the top of the table now when everybody gets together?
No, that's what I tell myself. But no, I mean, I think certainly us being a direct to consumer, I'm very lucky to be sitting in a chair where I get to own all of the revenue that comes in, because we do handle new customer acquisition, e-commerce, everything that runs through our channels. We do own the revenue piece, as well as things that we would consider traditionally top funnel, like brand and advertising. So I think for us, marketing has always been basically the top of the P&L line. So I would argue we were always important, and certainly I would say, we've maybe even leaned in even harder as we saw opportunity and category demand during the pandemic. But I think maybe within that, what's maybe shifted as well is just like such an increase in focus on like finding that accountability, data-backed marketing decisions, and driving ROI of marketing spend. I think for me, marketing's always been important, but now it's like, okay, well, how do we be important as an ROI driver specifically with like clear data behind it?
Great. Any closing thoughts, Kathy, before we finish up with Tammy?
For me, I'm grateful for HelloFresh because it helped me eat things that were delicious outside of potato chips, and to CIBC for supporting youth and mental health like you have, and just to be on this panel was a complete honor.
Tammy?
Yeah, just back to the question on has marketing's influence within an organization changed? I feel like it has, and I'm thankful for it, to be honest. I think the pandemic helped accelerate it because very quickly, no matter the function you were in, you were thinking about your consumer. And the consumer was first, and it didn't matter who you were. So all of a sudden, people were thinking much more like marketers. And we were that kind of first line of defense in making sure we were communicating the right messages to them. So I think that was one thing that helped the influence. The second thing we saw was that brand trust and brand purpose became an agenda topic at the C-suite. This was something extremely relevant, and I don't think it's something that's going to go away. This idea of leading from a place of purpose and acting with purpose was our blueprint for navigating the pandemic. And certainly there was a lot of rally around that universally. And then, like Candy said, with digital acceleration, we've gotten to prove our worth beyond just campaign metrics of old. We now can prove, via conversion, the direct link to sales. And so for that reason, I think marketing has established a much more credible role in what once was a perhaps a little marketing math they thought we were doing as far as our contribution. So I feel much better about the clarity on the results we drive as well.
Well said. Before I hand it off for closing remarks, I just want to say that you three are awesome. And I can't thank you enough. I think we need 2 hours. We're going to rally for 2 hours next year because every year, I say every year like I'm the regular, but last year and this year we've been blessed with outstanding panelists that have really added a lot of richness to the conversation. So thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
I do want to welcome Shannon. Though, who is, as you can see, the Canadian Media Directors Council. And Shannon is going to close us down for the day. So over to you, Shannon.
Thank you. How do I close this? Wow, what a fantastic and powerful session today. Thank you so much for everyone who's joined us. Where do I start? 11th year of the study with 6,700 Canadians examining 137 brands across 18 categories, paired with CMO interviews and obviously incredible debate today. So thank you. A genuine thank you to Michael McCain, our keynote speaker, and also the other industry leaders joining us. So Tammy from CIBC, Catherine Hay from Kids Help Phone, and Candy Lee from HelloFresh. Thank you. Today's goal was really to provide you with some Canadian perspective on what truly drives brand influence. As we can see, brands are basically redefining why they exist today. Whether it's creating a more sustainable world, that Michael beautifully took us through the journey of Maple Leaf Foods, to driving innovation that's anchored in assistance, one of Steve's pillars of influence. At CMDC, we do have a philosophy that we are better together. So thank you so much to all the partners involved in the session today. That includes Ipsos, Steve, the Globe and Mail, Andrew, and the ACA, Ron, thank you for joining, and also Publicists with Brett and Andrew. I want to say a special thank you. This also happens, there's a lot of people behind the scenes. Constance at the Globe and Mail, Davina at the ACA, and Miriam at Ipsos, and also the creative team at Publicis for all of your efforts. It is definitely noticed. Now, what's next? I'm sure with all this groundswell of insight and information, you're probably wondering, now what? Well, the beauty is Steve has the answer. You can head to the Ipsos website, and Steve has a really detailed POV and executive summary on the Ipsos study. And if you're looking for a little bit further detail, he also has a customized report. So you just ask him and he'll share some information on that. To wrap it up, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. And we do look forward to next year, hopefully in person, fingers crossed, for the 12th Ipsos Reid Most Influential Brand Study. Thank you.